He stole billions, destroyed thousands of lives, erased retirements, shattered futures, left families with nothing, and he still didn't think he was a criminal. Bernie Madoff, the man who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in American history, $65 billion, gone, and yet, in his own mind, he was never the villain in that story. Elizabeth Holmes. She told the world her technology could detect cancer from a single drop of blood. It couldn't. She knew it couldn't. But she kept selling the lie, kept raising the money, kept smiling for magazine covers, all while patients made life-altering medical decisions based on technology that didn't work. Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto wonderkind, the guy who dressed like a college student, drove a used car, talked about saving the world, while allegedly funneling billions of his customers' money into secret bets. And even after the collapse, he was still doing interviews, still explaining his logic, still believing, on some level, that he'd been misunderstood. These aren't stupid people. They're not reckless people. They are, by every measurable standard, some of the most intelligent, driven, calculated individuals to ever walk through a boardroom. So, how does someone cause this level of financial devastation and still sleep peacefully at night? That question isn't rhetorical. There is an answer. And it goes deeper than greed, deeper than arrogance. It lives inside the architecture of the human mind itself, and once you understand it, you'll never look at power, money, or even yourself the same way again. Here's the uncomfortable truth about white-collar criminals. They don't see themselves as villains. Not even close. In their internal narrative, the story they tell themselves when the lights go off and the room goes quiet, they are the protagonist. The misunderstood visionary. The one who saw what others couldn't. The one who made the hard calls that no one else had the courage to make. This isn't delusion. Well, it partly is. But it's something far more systematic than that. It's called cognitive dissonance. When a person's actions conflict with their self-image, the brain doesn't say, "You're a bad person." The brain doesn't allow that. Because accepting that truth would be psychologically catastrophic. Instead, the brain does something far more dangerous. It rewrites the story. It quietly, seamlessly, almost invisibly reconstructs reality so that the actions and the identity stay aligned. The mind is not built for guilt when ego is strong enough. It is built for survival. And sometimes, the biggest threat to survival isn't physical danger. Sometimes it's the mirror. So the brain protects you from what the mirror shows. It smooths the edges, softens the facts, reframes the crime, and what's left is a person who looks at decades of destruction and genuinely believes, they were justified. Let's break down exactly how that works. The first mechanism is rationalization, and it is breathtakingly elegant in its simplicity. The rationalizing mind doesn't eliminate guilt, it explains it away. It builds a logical scaffolding around wrongdoing until the wrongdoing disappears from view. The investors knew the risks. The market would have recovered. I just needed more time. I was protecting the company, protecting the jobs, protecting everyone who depended on us. Do you hear the internal logic? Each statement isn't a lie to the person saying it. It's a survival mechanism, a way of converting the crime into a calculated decision, a way of turning fraud into strategy. Madoff reportedly believed early on that he could recover the losses before anyone noticed. That belief was irrational. But it was real to him, and once you anchor your identity to a belief, you will defend that belief with everything you have, even when the evidence is screaming otherwise. That's what rationalization does. It doesn't just reduce guilt. It surgically removes it. And it leaves behind something far more dangerous, a clear conscience in a guilty person. The second mechanism is moral disengagement. This is where it gets darker. Because even if rationalization patches the cracks in the story, there's still the question of victims. Real people. Real suffering. How do you look at that and keep moving? The answer is, you stop looking. Moral disengagement is the process by which a person emotionally disconnects from the human consequences of their actions. And for white-collar criminals, This process is almost built into the environment itself. When you're committing financial fraud, you rarely see the people you're hurting. There's no face across the table, no voice on the other end of the phone saying, "I lost everything." There are spreadsheets. There are account numbers. There are performance reports, quarterly projections, and board presentations. Numbers don't cry. Numbers don't show up at your door with photographs of the life you dismantled. Numbers are clean, abstract, manageable. And the language, God, the language, does even more of the heavy lifting. Nobody in a boardroom says, "We're committing fraud." They say aggressive accounting. They say creative restructuring. They say optimizing the narrative. Every euphemism is a layer of insulation between the act and the acknowledgement of what the act actually is. When Elizabeth Holmes reportedly told employees they were changing healthcare, she may have genuinely believed it. That belief functioned as a wall between her actions and their consequences. Moral disengagement doesn't make someone a monster. It makes someone dangerously human, capable of causing enormous harm while feeling entirely at peace. The third mechanism is entitlement, and this one is where things get personal. There is a psychological profile that appears with uncomfortable frequency in white-collar crime. Researchers call it the Dark Triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy in varying combinations. But strip away the clinical language, and what you're looking at is this: a person who, at their core, believes the rules were written for someone else. Not arrogance for its own sake. Something more refined than that. A deep, almost philosophical conviction that their vision, their intelligence, their importance justifies a different standard. That the normal moral architecture of the world, the one everyone else has to live inside, simply doesn't apply to them. SBF spoke openly about utilitarian ethics, about doing whatever it takes to achieve good outcomes, about how ends justify means on a grand enough scale. Holmes believed, it seems, that the mission was real enough to warrant the deception. Madoff reportedly considered himself a titan, a man who had given so much to so many that the fraud was, in a distorted calculus, owed to him. This is entitlement weaponized, not "I deserve nice things," but something far more insidious: "I am the exception." And when you believe you're the exception, you don't break rules. In your mind, you transcend them. The fourth mechanism might be the most chilling of all, because it explains how ordinary people cross extraordinary lines. The slippery slope. No one wakes up on a Tuesday morning and decides to commit billion-dollar fraud. That's not how it works. It starts with something small. A number adjusted slightly. A projection rounded up just enough. A disclosure quietly omitted because the timing isn't right. Just this once. Just until we recover. Just to get through this quarter. Each small compromise recalibrates the moral compass by just a fraction of a degree. It doesn't feel like fraud. It feels like a judgment call. A calculated risk. A temporary bridge. And then the next one is slightly larger. And the one after that, larger still. And because each step is measured against the previous step, not against the original line, the distance traveled becomes invisible. By the time someone is at the center of a billion-dollar collapse, they didn't take one catastrophic leap. They took 10,000 small steps. And every single one of them, in isolation, felt almost reasonable. That's the machinery. That's how the mind converts years of criminal behavior into a coherent story of victimhood and misunderstanding. Rationalization, disengagement, entitlement, escalation. 4 mechanisms. One unshakable conclusion: I'm not the bad guy. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. For you. For me. For everyone watching this. This psychology is not exclusive to people who wear expensive suits in federal courtrooms. The mechanisms are human. The scale is different. You've rationalized something you knew was wrong. It wasn't that serious. Everyone does it. They would have done the same to me. You've disengaged from the impact of a decision because thinking about it too hard felt worse than just moving on. You've told yourself, at least once, that you deserved something, or that a rule didn't quite apply in your specific situation. Small examples. Tiny moments. Nothing that ends up in a courtroom. But the architecture? Identical. The difference between the person reading this and the person in the orange jumpsuit is not a fundamental difference in psychology. It's a difference in opportunity, in stakes, in the size of the sandbox they were playing in. That's not an accusation. It's an observation. And it should make you think. Because here's what stays with you long after the headlines fade, long after the trial ends, long after the documentary wraps. The most dangerous criminals in the world are not the ones who know they're evil. Those people at least understand what they are. The most dangerous are the ones who believe, with absolute sincerity, with a conviction that never wavers, that they were right, that they were misunderstood, that history will vindicate them, that the system failed them, that you, the jury, the public, you simply couldn't see what they saw. That psychological armor is nearly impenetrable, and it doesn't just live in billionaires and executives. It lives in the unchecked corners of every human mind that has ever needed to survive its own reflection. So the question isn't just, how did they get there? The question is, what would it take for any of us to get there and never even notice? Think about that. Drop your answer in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.